Hello, I'm Doug, and welcome to the Krewe of Japan podcast, a weekly podcast where we take you on audio journeys through Japanese culture. Welcome back to our podcast. Buckle in that seatbelt because today is part one of a two-part series where we go for a wild ride into the world of drifting and street racing in Japan with YouTuber and drift hunter Albo Agunday of Albo Media. Thanks to popular media like the anime series Initial D, and of course Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, for better or for worse, many around the world have heard about the drifting and street racing culture in Japan to some extent. Through his YouTube channel, Albo took the world behind the curtain to get a glimpse at something only many imagine experiencing. From a teacher on the JET program to being a YouTuber, Albo shares with us his stories of his journey into Japanese drift and racing culture, like the time he finally got behind the wheel of his first owned sports car in Japan.
They tossed me the keys and said, hey, just take it for a drive. We're going to sell it. If you want it, great. If you don't want it, it's fine. I took it for a spin, like 20 minutes. And when I came back, I was like, here's my money. Take it. Like, this is my car. Like, you can't take it back. No take backs.
His first in-person encounter with live drifting.
Drifted almost serenely, almost like he was in the state of meditation. And I remember, like, in that exact moment, I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life.
How his first video went viral.
So I decided to just send that to him as a cold email. To my absolute surprise, he got back to me and he was like, this is actually really interesting. So he featured the video in his article. And what happened was, like, overnight, it got like 70,000 views.
And so much more. This episode is going to be a fun listen, but also one hopefully that will inspire you to chase your dreams. Albo's story is one of those that shows you that perseverance pays off, especially when pursuing something that you are passionate about. But you know what I'm passionate about? Getting you to this interview. So enough with my talking. Let's dive on in.
All right, today's interview is going to be amazing. We have Albo, the self-proclaimed drift hunter. You may know him from his YouTube channel, or maybe you find him on Instagram. I know I follow your Instagram. Love seeing those pictures. So thank you for coming on, Albo.
No worries. Thanks for having me on, Jen. And Doug.
Yeah, Doug's here too. Let's not forget Doug.
You know what? I've forgotten to introduce Jen a few times. Like, I get caught up in introducing the guests. And I'm like, oh yeah, Jen's here too.
Like,
I guess we just kind of figure both of us are here, so
yeah. For the viewers who are listening, and for the people who are just listening to the audio, helps us set the stage.
That's actually everybody. We don't record the video, so unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
One day we'll get there.
One day maybe.
So I don't have to put all this makeup on. Okay, you should have told me. Okay.
You know what though? I went and
you
shaved.
You look beautiful for us.
I did.
I cleaned up for you, man. All right. Well, before we jump into our main topic, there is one question that we ask all of our guests, and that is if you have a connection to New Orleans, whether you've been before or if you have, what is that favorite fondest memory? But if you haven't, what do you think of when you hear New Orleans?
I don't have a personal connection. I think, well, actually, coming here on the JET program, which is the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, which I know, Doug, you just let me know actually a few minutes ago. You also you were in Japan on about a decade ago. I had several friends who were from, all across the States, and some were from, of course, New Orleans. And when the flooding happened, I remember, of course, it pops up in everyone's news feeds. So, that kind of, that's probably the extent of my experience, just like supporting my friends who have gone through those kind of difficult situations. And also, of course, loving Cajun food on the happier side of it.
Yeah, right. It's like that's what New Orleans is known for: flooding and hurricanes, and then really good food.
And actually, Albo, you're the
music.
first.
Yep.
I think you're the first person to actually even mention the hurricane.
Yeah.
I don't think any of our other guests have ever mentioned the hurricane before.
Oh wow.
So that's interesting. That's interesting to know. We love hearing all the different answers.
After this interview, I'm gonna have to circle back with you and see who from New Orleans you knew on JET, because I knew a few people, but I don't know. I'm curious. So we'll circle back to that.
Yeah, we will check our Facebook friend lists.
Yeah, I know, right?
There'll be a few folks in there. But, there's that accent is very. Sometimes folks from New Orleans have a very distinctive accent. Can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, sorry.
No, you're good.
Well, Another thing before we go into like the main topic of the conversation is, we like to ask all of our guests, what is their Japan journey? So like, what got you interested in Japan and then eventually like living there?
Oh man, where to start? I mean, I think a lot of people had, when they're growing up, this fascination with Japanese culture. Maybe it was born through movies and through anime. I was an immigrant kid to Canada, actually. So we only immigrated to Canada when I was about 10 years old. And so I think moving to Canada, previously I was living in Saudi Arabia. So it's quite a culture shift, quite a culture shock. And I think because I was born in the Philippines, but growing up in Saudi Arabia and then growing up 10 years later, still as a child, but in Canada, I really was kind of drifting around trying to figure out what my identity was. And I was also kind of drawn towards Japanese culture. One reason was when I would go back to the Philippines for, like summer vacation, my older cousins would have like all these pirated PlayStation games or these like VHS or Betamax tapes of old animes and stuff. And that kind of like just gave me the first exposure to like Japanese anime. And I found it really compelling because sometimes those stories would be quite mature, quite adult, and it was completely different from like SpongeBob or whatever was on TV at that time. So it was really fascinating. And I think later on through anime, I made a bunch of friends who were also into different anime like Gundam or Evangelion or some other really old ones you guys probably have never heard of. Actually, no. Maybe you guys know like Escaflowne or like I really like these mobile.
Yeah.
It used to be on like the Saturday morning cartoons, I think.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, you would have to wake up really, really early. So that was actually a pivotal moment in my childhood when I discovered that if you wake up like around 6 a.m., you could catch like a really early showing of like Pokemon at like 6 or 6:30. This is like before it was popular, and this would often end up being this kind of like a. Actually, no. Sorry, hang on. I'm getting my stories mixed up. It was actually around 6 or 6:30. There was Sailor Moon, but I wanted to get up early to watch this other unrelated TV show about video games and like the new video game coming out. But it was like the same time slot on a different channel. And me and my 3 younger sisters would always try to one up each other by waking up like a half an hour earlier, like the next Saturday.
To claim the TV.
Right, exactly. So it's like whoever gets the control, like, that's their birthright apparently. And so they could watch whatever they wanted that week. So that kept escalating until I managed to just stay up like all night and just start at like 2 or 3 in the morning. And that's when I discovered in Canada, like channel 50 or something, I think it was called the Teletoon channel. There would be very, very late showings of anime like Macross or Ninja Scroll. And that kind of blew my mind because I was like, whoa, this is like nothing I've ever seen before. So that kind of really kickstarted that fascination. And then later on, I also discovered other anime like Initial D, which is about, the Japanese car culture. And, fast forward like a long time later, I also came to Japan on the JET program. I think I was trying to avoid becoming an accountant. I had gone to school for like business, and I studied like finance and accounting and stuff. And I was actually working part time at a bank, and I could see like if I looked down the hall, I could see at the time, what was that, like 15 years ago now, my boss's boss was like this like really miserable looking dude, and I was just like, oh my god, that's my future. And I was thinking, oh geez, I need to
I gotta get out of here.
Yeah, exactly. I need to get out of here. And I was like, well, let me at least sign up for some possible programs, things I'd heard about. When I was taking my driver's license like several years, maybe like half a decade earlier, I met a friend who had gone on to teach in Korea for a summer. So that's where I had discovered this concept of teaching English abroad. And going down that rabbit hole, I discovered this other blog called, Doug, you might have heard of it. It's called Gaijin Smash, or the Chronicles of Az. Yeah. I don't know if you ever read any of it. It was an incredibly well-written blog.
It's been a long time, yeah.
It was basically this guy's blog. He's from the States. and he would basically chronicle his experiences working in this elementary school and a junior high school, and it seemed like an anime to me. I was like, wow, this is so fascinating because it seemed very similar to all these slice of life animes that I had watched, like Azumanga Daioh and like Great Teacher Onizuka and all of
That's my
these.
stuff. Sorry.
Right? Yeah, way back. A lot of viewers are like, "Oh man, these guys are really, really dating themselves." But I think I was kind of fascinated by this idea that the depiction of Japan within anime and movies and TV was not all that far from the reality. And I was like, wow, that's just so different from my life in Canada, in the Western world. And so when I discovered through that blog the existence of the JET program, I decided, well, you know what? Maybe this is a way to escape this horrible fate of becoming an accountant. Sorry, Doug, if you're an accountant.
No, but I was a
No.
business student, and I did say, all right, I'm going to go do JET for a year and then maybe come back, and then ended up doing 3. So I'm right there with you.
Right. Okay, so exactly. So we had the same path. Came up with the exact same idea. And somehow, despite the rigorous application process and apparently very low percentage possibility chance of getting in, by the grace of God, I managed to. So you write an essay. Okay, the two main parts of it to get into the JET program is you write an essay, and then you have to do like this in-person interview with like 2 or 3 folks who, one of them usually like 1 or 2 of them used to be former Jets, and the other one would be like a Japanese person who is within the local community, maybe as a professor or something.
Mhm.
And sometimes those interviews are kind of like war tribunals. So I had kind of like prepared for it, and I was just like really, really concerned that it was going to be like this brutal hearing. Basically, it turned out to be. I got these 2 really, really, really lovely ladies, and this is where I discovered my secret power of drawing really cute animals. So what happened is, sorry, I'm just going on all these random tangents.
No, you're good.
Towards the end of the interview, they'd asked me a bunch of questions like, how would you deal with this situation? Like if a student throws a chair out of a window, like what would you do? This ended up happening later, like on JET. So I was like, yeah, that's what I did do. But they asked me, can you do a sample lesson about animals? And I was like, oh my God, I've practiced every single other topic except animals. I was like holidays, fruits and vegetables, and numbers, ABCs, you name it. And I didn't think to do a lesson about animals. So I was like, yeah, I can do that. And as I was walking towards, like, there's like a blackboard behind me, I was almost crying because I'm like, God, I'm such an idiot. I think to prepare this. So I was like, okay, let me first just draw like a bear. I was like, oh God, stupid bear. Started drawing it. And then behind me, like my 2 interviewers were like, kawaii. And it was in that moment, I was like, I'm in. So I drew a bear, and then I drew a giraffe, and then an elephant, and then a lion. And like these 4 animals saved my life because my interviewers were like, oh my God, those are the cutest animals I've ever seen. And then I realized I had to actually teach a lesson, and I was like, okay, so what sound does a lion make? And I was like, roar, right? And then it turned out to be a very good lesson because in Japanese they have like different sounds for animals.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Eventually I got to the giraffe, and then that kind of became a
Stumped
big...
you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something because I didn't even know what sound a giraffe makes, right? And I just kind of winged it. I was like, 15 years later, I still have not confirmed whether or not that is the sound they make. So we'll leave it at that. It'll forever be a mystery. But somehow, despite my not knowing what sound a giraffe makes, I managed to get into the JET program, and I was sent to live in a prefecture called Gunma, which is maybe a couple hours south of where you were placed, Doug.
Yeah.
So you were in Fukushima, right?
Yeah, it's like southwest of where I was, like somewhere in that vicinity. It's like, I think southwest. Hold on. Yeah. I had to like turn myself to figure out where I am.
Yeah, you gotta orient yourself like as if you were a map, right? Yeah.
Right.
It's like, I'll be around here. Okay. It's on my spleen. Yeah, I digress. I mean, like, Gunma isn't really known for anything except for cabbage. Actually, no, it's known for several things. It's known for cabbage, strong wind, and strong women. and I've confirmed these are all true. My wife is from Gunma. It is also famous worldwide for Initial D, which is, it's one of the animes we were talking about earlier. And Initial D is basically an anime that details the exploits of this illegal Uber driver who basically delivers tofu. Like I digress, but it's basically the story is like there's this tofu shop and they make this really good tofu, and tofu is like really soft, right? So you can't like jiggle it too much or it's gonna break. And the tofu also has like a certain shelf life in the heat or in like it needs to be refrigerated pretty quickly. And so to get from like the tofu shop to the place where it needs to be delivered, there's like this long mountain road that needs to be traversed. And this became like the daily routine of this the son of the shop owner. The guy's name was Takumi, and he would deliver this tofu up and down this stretch of mountain road ever since before he was even eligible to drive. And that was kind of like the basis of the story of Initial D. And like through that experience, he became this really, really kind of like a genius driver. And he would execute a type of driving technique known as like a drift, where you kind of like cause the rear wheels to lose traction so you can slide. And so yeah, this anime was super cool. Just the concept of it was like super, super cool. And there was also like an associated video game and a manga series, and I consumed all of that like years before I had ever even thought to apply to the JET program. And so when I did apply to the JET program, after I got in, like a month later, they sent me a letter, and in that letter, it had my placement of where I was going to go. And I remember I looked at it, and of course, I wasn't expecting to get Tokyo. Of course, like many people would write Tokyo on their preferred placements. You could write 2 or 3 if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And kind of like the legend was, if you wrote Tokyo, you were not only not going to get it, they were going to send you as far away from Tokyo as possible for having the gall to write that.
I actually knew a guy who got Tokyo.
Did he?
But he got like Oshima. He got Oshima, like the big island off of Tokyo Bay.
Right. I was going to get to that part. Yeah.
Not actually Tokyo proper.
Right. Yeah. So there are like these islands off the coast of Tokyo that are technically within the jurisdiction of Tokyo. So it's karma got to him, and he was sent to live in well, I mean, to your point, I heard that's like an incredible placement, very beautiful, and not that far. You have to take a ferry.
He had a cushy job. He only had to teach like 2 or 3 days a week. Every week he had a 4-day weekend.
It's crazy. And he basically lived at the beach, right? And like
or he'd come over and
you would go surfing, and it sounds like an incredible experience. I was sent to the land of cabbage, and well, at least that's what my like senpai knew it as, because they weren't like Initial D fans, and so it wasn't until later I kind of discovered or realized that I was being sent to where this anime takes place. And I remember like once like I clued in, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to go to Japan. I'm going to live out my Initial D dreams. I'm going to buy a sports car. I'm going to go on those mountain roads, and I'm going to, go for drives. And I thought it was going to be the coolest thing ever, because Initial D is based. It's not only set in Gunma. There are all these locations and all these people and all these places that are really similar to like real life. But I didn't realize how similar it was until I was actually there, and until actually like several months or almost a year later, when I started trying to dig into it, and I discovered basically that every single story element within the series had a direct equivalent in real life. And that kind of really blew my mind, because I was like, oh man, I could literally go to these places and go to, like the real tofu shop location, or the place where like a date happens in the movie. And then I thought, hang on, does that mean the drifting scene also exists? Jumping ahead, like it did, and it completely blew my mind. But let me stop here and pass the ball back to you guys.
No, you're good, man.
No, because that's kind of like part of your Japan journey, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, how long did you stay in Japan for JET? How long did you do JET for?
So I did a maximum possible tenure, which was 5 years.
Okay.
I think it's still officially 5 years, but because of COVID, there's like extenuating
Yeah.
circumstances. Some
Some
people.
unicorns out there for 7 years and stuff like that. Like,
Oh
they
yeah,
did.
they've got like
Yeah.
what's a unicorn with two horns?
Duocorn?
Dual corn?
I don't know if they
Dual corn?
exist.
Dual corns. Yeah.
Okay,
There you
but
go.
so like after your 5 years, so like you just decided to stay, or like how did that come
So,
about?
well, okay. So I think midway through my tenure, so at first I was thinking, well, I'm gonna enjoy my time here in Japan. I'm gonna go
Of
back
course.
after like 1 or 2 years, and go back to real life. Um, and then Peter Pan syndrome kicked in, and I was like, okay, no, I can't leave. I got to figure out a way to stay. This is awesome. 5 years is closing in, but I still have some time. And I don't know how. Actually, yeah, I do know. We can unpack it a bit. But I basically came to the conclusion. I was like, I'm gonna become a famous YouTuber, and it's gonna work out. It's all gonna work out. In retrospect, I'm like, man, what a bet that was.
Yeah.
It was kind of through because of the help of podcasts. Actually, there were several podcasts I was listening to which were talking about the idea of a location independent online business. So I had started several different ideas. One of them was this jet program related community website, which I started called the Jet Coaster. And I kind of had the idea that, if we could create a site where people could come together and share their experiences, and it could be kind of like this big resource for anybody who is interested in jet. Now, maybe there's a way to finagle that into like some other opportunity. And so at the same time while I was doing that, I was also on the side kind of exploring more and more about the underground car culture. I had bought a Miata, which is in Japan it's called a Roadster, and it's pretty much at the time it was like the cheapest sports car you could buy. I'd come to Japan with like basically no savings, and I had just kind of scrounged together like $2,000 after saving for a couple months of eating just like ramen and hotomoto. Um, a habit which continued even after
After.
I had saved the money. I was like, yeah, this is great. I can just pay for car parts by just go eating ramen all day. Incidentally, my next door neighbor was trying to sell his Miata. I had a completely different car in mind because at the time the Miata was considered, for some bizarre reason, a hairdresser's car. I don't even know what that means. I think it's like there's this stereotype that you're like a male beautician if you drive a Miata. It was strange, but that's what it was 15 years ago. So I was like, no, that's weird. Why do I want one of those things, right? But my next door neighbor, who was also a jet at the time, the car actually belonged to his wife, and they were getting rid of it because they were getting married, and then their dad was giving them a car. Blah blah blah. Long story short, they tossed me the keys and said, "Hey, just take it for a drive. We're gonna sell it. If you want it, great. If you don't want it, it's fine." I took it for a spin, like 20 minutes, and when I came back, I was like, "Here's my money. Take it. Like this is my car. Like you can't take it back. No take backs." I just fell in love with that car. It was so much fun. I mean, you could put a top down. It was pretty impractical and it leaked. Like when it rained, I would get wet. But I was like, this is like the funnest thing ever. It was so fun. And I started going on these drives. And because I had realized that Initial D was like a real place, I thought, hey, I could go to those toge, like those mountain roads where this anime takes place. And I started going there, and I realized the guardrails would be like all messed up. I thought that's really interesting. And then I realized there was tire marks going into those guardrails. It's like that's very very interesting. And so I kept going out, but I would never catch like at the right moment. Like sometimes I would hear these cars like driving in the distance, and like what I mean by driving, like you could hear them. It's like you could hear their exhaust and they're screeching. And so I was like, okay, it's happening somewhere, but I can't figure out like exactly where it is. But just through talking to people, I got to know other jets actually who were also into cars, and several of them also had sports cars, and they kind of started inviting me out to these different things, these meetups. And one day, one of them who was really into drifting, and his car would get more and more banged up every time I saw it. I was like, why is your car getting like more and more destroyed every time I see it? And then some weeks it would have like a new bumper, and the next week the bumper would be gone. I was like, "Are you a really bad driver or something?" Um, and he's like, "No, bro, it's drifting." And I was like, "Oh my god, like an initial D?" It's like, "Yeah, exactly like that." So I somehow persuaded him to take me along one day, and so I had a chance to see it like firsthand. And I remember so clearly there was this one moment where we got out of the car. We were walking up this hill to this area called the gallery. The gallery is just kind of like where all of the people kind of gather to watch the drifting, kind of corner by corner, or for one particular corner. And as we're walking up the hill, there's one of these. It's like a pole with a convex mirror on it, so you can see around the corner, and you could hear, the sounds of drifting and like the loud, super loud exhaust sounds and the engine sounds and the smell of burnt rubber and clutch in the air. And it was just intoxicating. And I remember the convex mirror kind of like lit up with this bright light of the high beam of incoming car, and it suddenly disappeared. Right. So you can imagine, like, imagine this for people who are watching. I'm pointing at my mic, and then I'm using my phone to to demonstrate like a car, right? and and you can see how like the head beams would be kind of like flashing like this, right?
Yeah.
And it suddenly it like disappeared, and you guys can obviously figure out what's going on. But
Yeah.
what happened is like the car went sideways, completely sideways, pulled the
Just-
e-brake
yeah.
and slid. It was almost like seeing a UFO. It was so surreal to see it like just disappear, like it vanished. And then in the next instant, it rounded the corner in like this perfect drift. And meanwhile, like I was standing just a few feet from the edge of the line onto the road, and the car comes around, and it was like this slow motion moment where I could almost reach out and touch the hood. It was so close, and we kind of made eye contact, me and the guy who was driving the car, and it was so mind blowing because I remember seeing how in control, like perfectly in control, he was in a situation that I would most definitely have died if I was
Yeah.
in that situation. I was like, I would have careened, hit the mountain wall, bounced off that, hit a tree, flipped over, rolled into the guardrail, hopped the guardrail, and then fell down the mountain, and then exploded once it got to the bottom. But he just kind of like drifted almost serenely, almost like he was in the state of meditation. And I remember, like, in that exact moment, I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. I need to somehow share this experience because, like, I had never seen anything on, at the time, like almost 10 years ago, YouTube was not nearly it wasn't like the way it is now where, you can be like a quote unquote like YouTuber and you can share like your story from wherever you are. It was kind of a different thing. It was like people would mostly sit in front of their screens and like talk to the computer, to their webcam. And I was thinking, oh my God, like this could be a documentary on like the Discovery Channel or on National Geographic. And it was just so fascinating that I spent the rest of the night just like completely mind blown is like not even the right word. I was just so intoxicated by the entire atmosphere of the whole situation. And I kept asking people all these questions in like my broken Japanese, and that kind of really kickstarted like this desire to understand more and deeper and deeper and deeper. And that was one of the moments where I kind of realized living in Japan is kind of like you get this huge cake, and when you first get the cake, you're like, wow, that's really amazing, delicious looking cake. But the first year you're in Japan, you only get to eat the icing. And you have to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper to get to like the jelly-filled center. Are cakes even jelly-filled?
It can be. So.
You get layers, if it's a double or triple layer cake, you might have like different fruit or whatever in the filling on the
I think
each
I'm
layer,
mixing my pastries. Yeah. I was like, I'm imagining a cake with like a donut in the center of it. Somebody should make that. Sounds
Sounds
great.
like a good cake.
Yeah. It's, I've been trying to avoid carbs, so I have like these carb-related dreams, and
I've been there.
these delicious dreams. Yeah.
I've done this like crazy keto diet before.
Yes.
and, like,
Yes.
I'd have,
Keto.
like,
Oh man.
I've had those carb dreams or I'd have carb nightmares where I'd like wake up in a sweat, like, oh my God, I ate like bread in my dream.
Yeah.
And I'd be,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I broke my.
Oh no. Did it kick
I've
me out
been
of
on that in
keto?
a while, though.
Oh no. Was that over 45 grams of carbs? Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. Anyway, somebody should make that cake donut thing. But basically, Japan is kind of like that cake donut. You have to. the deeper and deeper you go into that pastry, sorry, like the more you realize how like fascinating and interesting and like and delicious it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that made me kind of realize, okay, even after I could stay here for 15 years and I would still barely scratch the surface. There's just so many layers to it. And I kind of figured, well, a couple things happened. So I was working that other project, the Jet Coaster, and I kind of, after I finished Jet, I realized, now that I'm like no longer a Jet, for some reason I no longer have very much interest in Jet related matters. It was kind of should have been obvious at some point earlier. But fortunately, I discovered that other passion of cars. I mean, I was always into cars and in particular, like Japanese sports cars. But here I found myself kind of like in the center of it. And I also thought, well, there weren't very many people who had kind of obtained this level of access and been able to build a lot of these friendships and relationships with like these different people within the community and could then convey their story. So I was in this very privileged kind of position. And I realized, well, if I'm not going to do it, who will? And so I thought, well, let me at least try to put together something that, let me work hard to put together like a cool documentary with whatever resources I have. I'll just try to edit something and make it. And then I'll try to figure something else out. So I put that thing together, upload it onto YouTube. At first it didn't get much traction, but I decided to send it to like several blogs. After I was trying to research, well, how do videos get traction? And what I discovered was, well, if you get traffic from external sources, that could really help the video. So I ended up sending it to a blog called Kotaku, which is about gaming. And on that blog, there's actually a regular column by an editor or writer named Brian Ashcraft, and he would have this like regular column about different aspects of life in Japan. So I decided to just send that to him as a cold email. To my absolute surprise, he got back to me and he was like, this is actually really interesting. So he featured the video in his article. And what happened was like overnight, it got like 70,000 views. And I was like, phew, wow, I was right. I was kind of like vindicated that a lot of people were interested in this underground scene. And that kind of really convinced me that this was something that was worth pursuing, because it was also like a passion of mine. But it wasn't just the cars that I was really fascinated about. It's actually like the culture and the people and trying to figure out like why people go drifting or why they choose to spend so much money on their cars and stuff. Like now I completely understand it, because at the time I didn't have much money, so I couldn't figure out how people could justify spending so much of their income on tires or on brake pads, which are like a consumable which will run out really, really quickly. And like now I understand that the main reason is just because it's like so fun. But there's a lot of layers to it. So yeah, basically I figured, well, this is so interesting that I will somehow try to make this into a career. And then kind of what ended happening was I tried to unpack it. I was like, okay, well, I saw people were starting to make things on YouTube which were like car related, but like, how can I take it a step further? What would this really look like if it was like the best version that could possibly be? And I was like, maybe if it was like a documentary on Netflix or something. And so I kind of set that as my big goal. I was like, let me try to pursue making something at that level. And just whatever happens. And let me just kind of keep going in that direction as my North Star. And I don't know, I have like these weird like theories, but of how the universe works. But I think it kind of boils down to, I have this basic personal philosophy that if you get really, really clear about what you want, somehow the universe is going to align and put various, events into your path that will help you along in that journey. Because, just from my personal observation, there were all these different moments that connected kind of serendipitously, but they were also set up by things that happened years before. And I could never have suspected that one person I met years ago would have been the catalyst to this other sequence of events happening. So, earlier I was talking about this website I created called the Jet Coaster, and it had actually kind of gotten some traction within the Jet community. and people were kind of like reaching out to me and saying like, hey, you can make an app out of this, or maybe you could get some advertising, or all these, various ideas. And it was actually one of my best friends who came to Japan with me actually on the JET program. His name is Thomas. And he had gone on to live in Kagawa Prefecture. And we had kind of stayed in touch over the years, but he saw what I was doing with this website, and he said, hey, Albo, like, what if, we made it to be kind of like, I don't know, like the Facebook of jets or something, or the WordPress for jets. I don't know what crazy term we came up with. Maybe like the Medium for jets or something. And we're like, okay, yeah, let's try to build this thing out together. So what happened was we had built out like this really, really robust community website where it was basically like this, maybe like Tofugu. Have you guys heard of Tofugu?
Yeah, I have.
It's a really, really nice site, a combination of like language learning and like cultural articles and things like that. And we had made it so like you could basically become, a guest contributor, and over time and after accumulating experience, you could like rise in the ranks and become like a senior contributor, things like that. And we had kind of like built like this platform on WordPress, and it looked really bad on the back end, but we were really proud of how good it looked on the outside. And basically, Thomas had, after JET, had, when you're on JET, especially if you come out of college, you basically have like no career job experience aside from being a JET. And so this is kind of a big catch-22 for a lot of jets. It's like, okay, I need the job to get experience, but I have no experience because I have no job. So it's quite a big and so, Thomas had kind of finagled his way into various interviews with some tech companies. And he had ended up demoing our website and got on like a job as an executive, what's it called? Basically a recruiter for like a tech firm. So a recruiter within a company that specializes in placing people in tech companies. And what happened was, after I finished JET, I was like, okay, I need to somehow stay in Japan. Let me just do whatever I can to survive while trying to become a famous YouTuber. And so I took a job at like probably the worst private English teaching school in the world. You would call them eikaiwa here in Japan, which is basically, it means like an English conversation school. To be fair, like it was fun. There were some fun things about it. The students were great, and it was kind of like a one-on-one situation, so it was very chill and relaxed. But there were some aspects of it that fundamentally I felt were incredibly terrible. So, for example, the owner had developed his own way of teaching the ABCs, which was basically, I would teach 3 letters each class. And if at any point the student had forgotten any of the letters, we would start all the way from A. It was this bizarre, really, really bizarre system that didn't make sense. And I was like, okay, it was kind of soul crushing to have to do this.
Oh, to do the same thing over and over and over, I bet.
Yeah, and to teach this system where, I could teach this in like 30 minutes,
Yeah.
So it just felt very disingenuous. And then, anyways, eventually, after doing this for 2 years, I was like, okay, I need to get out, figure something out. I didn't figure something out. I just kept working on the YouTube thing, and I was like, yeah, this is going to go little by little, and I'm just going to apply for jobs here and there and see what happens. So what ended up happening was, my friend Thomas had recommended me for several jobs at some tech companies, and I interviewed for them, and then on the basis of the Jet Coaster website and my budding YouTube channel, I managed to squeak a job into like a really good tech company. And it turned out that one of my now current boss actually is also a YouTuber. So I think that there was that connection there. And then what happened, it was like this crazy sequence of events. I had gotten into this company. I started, I don't want to name it, but like basically I work in like the streaming industry company, kind of providing like movies and TV shows for, people who want to watch them. And within this, okay, I got to be careful with my words here because it would reveal it very quickly. But I had I was in the cafeteria one day, and I had noticed somebody who I'd seen before in other training videos, like YouTube related training videos. And I was like, hey, haven't I seen you in this video? And he was like, oh, wow, you actually watched it. And I was like, yeah, I did. They were great. And I was like, so I'm actually a YouTuber. And he was like, oh, well, how many subscribers do you have? Kind of just buttering me up, and just like, and it looks like, okay, let's hear it. Probably he's got like,
what's your pitch?
500, yeah, exactly, 500 subscribers or something. And I was like, it's coming along. It's like 40,000 subscribers, and it was like, what? It's like, what do you do again? Like, where are you working? Like, which team are you working in? And we ended up striking up a conversation, and he was like, okay, I need to introduce you to my former boss, who is actually now working at the Discovery Channel. And I was like, oh my God, it's all coming together. It's all the pieces are coming together. Yeah, I'd written on my, it's actually still there. I'm pointing to a whiteboard, and it was like these plans that I had. And I was like, okay, I'm going to make a documentary on like Discovery Channel or Netflix or whatever. That kind of like reinforced this idea in my head that, when you have this idea, when you have this really strong belief in a very specific goal or dream, you just keep working at it for like years, somehow the universe is going to align and kind of put you in the path of that goal. And, like things are still like that particular thing with Discovery didn't, I guess, like it was COVID related. So I ended up working at Discovery as a consultant. That kind of put me in touch with like some like production team people, and like we were in the plans to like make a TV show and stuff. But COVID happened, and then years later, a couple years later, some things are in the works, not with Discovery, but I kind of also came full circle and realized that being a YouTuber, which maybe we can get into, is very interesting, and I'd love to talk to you guys about it. But like being a YouTuber or even like a content creator in 2022 is an incredible opportunity. And I think it's still definitely an opportunity for people in whatever niche they're in. There's so much possibility for scale, because, it's like if you make, I'm like, for example, I'm right behind you guys. I'm using this laptop, but behind the laptop there's a screen, and on the screen I'm editing my next video. And this video might take me 30 or 40 hours to edit. But then when I think about how many hours in total people are going to spend viewing that, like it blows my mind. So I think, same as this podcast, right? We record it once. It takes like an hour or like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours because I can't stop talking. But you do it once, you put it out there, and it's like, thousands of people can enjoy it. So
no, it's such a, like you said, I think especially once the pandemic hit, the option of, I think a lot of people went to streaming content as a source of, because you can't go to the movies anymore. You can't go out and do stuff. So let me just go on YouTube. Let me go on Netflix. Let me go on whatever. And that's actually how this podcast came to, be. And our other host, Nigel, who couldn't be here today, but he had like this idea and kind of came out of that. It's just like, hey, we really want to do this. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts lately. It'd be a great idea to kind of throw it out there and see. And we were like, yeah, let's do it. And
yeah, just do it.
Yeah, like you said, and we can go on hours and hours. I think we had a couple other episodes where we talk about just the kind of behind the scenes, like in our end of season recaps that we've done. And you'd be surprised how accessible people have been, like just kind of like talking when you need to reach out to someone for, help, or, hey, are you interested in maybe coming on? Like, you never know what people will say. And I think the big takeaway is you don't know until you ask. And the worst thing you hear is no.
Yep.
Or no response. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Funny you said earlier, Brian Ashcroft. We actually had him on an episode in our first season.
Yeah,
we did an episode about soccer.
Wow.
Yeah, so all these connections, man. But I actually had a question for you, and to take it back to the early days of you driving in Japan, before we get into drifting specifically, I want to ask you a question about just driving in general. And was there a big learning curve for you when it came to driving on the opposite side of the road from what you're used to driving in Canada?
No, you make that switch really fast, I think.
Yeah.
I mean,
I agree.
Like when you're living here, right? Like even if before you're driving, you're going to be riding in like buses or other people's cars. And at first it's going to freak you out, but it's going to be like the first 30 minutes. You're like, oh, yeah, I can't, if you're sitting in the front seat, oh no, I got to step on the brakes, and then there's nothing there, and you kind of freak out. And then you're like, oh, I'm going to die now, but no, you're fine. And then you make that switch, and you're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, people just, drive on the other side of the road. And it's actually not that bad. It's actually weirder when I go back, because when I try to shift, I instinctively try to use my left hand, and I just bang it into the door, right?
Yeah.
So that's the main thing. Yeah, when I do go back, sometimes I get confused for like crossing an intersection, especially because in Canada the intersections are so wide, and I'm like, Oh
Am I
crap! Which
turning
one
into
is
the
it
right
again?
lane?
Right. right.
Am I turning into oncoming
Yeah.
traffic or the right way?
Like if there's no incoming traffic, like if there's incoming traffic, if there's somebody at the light, that's fine. But if there's no cars there, sometimes you get confused and you're like, uh
Oh
oh.
my God.
Right.
Same thing. I know exactly what you're talking about because I drove, like living in Fukushima, you kind of need a car.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was trains, but they were very infrequent. So it was like when I had bought a Subaru. Oh God, I can't remember, but it was not. It was a wagon. It wasn't a sports car, unfortunately. But
I
when I
too
had a
have a Subaru wagon. So,
there you go. Jesus, man. I bought it in like Saitama, and then I had to get it delivered to like the place where I
yeah.
got my registration and
I
stuff. And then I
too
had to
got my car from Saitama. No, actually.
oh, hey, we can keep going and going, right? It was funny though because I tried to drive it like right after the guy dropped it off, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is too intimidating!" Like, because right when you come out of the car place, it's like a windy road that goes through a very narrow tunnel to get to the other area where I lived, and I got in the car and I just tried to start driving, and I'm like, "Oh crap!" Like, 'cause that was the first time I ever drove in Japan. Like, I didn't even test drive the car when I bought it. I looked at it and everything looked good. But I was like, can you just drive this to the station for me? I asked the guy, I was like, can you just drive this to the station for me? Because he was taking the train back. He drove it up to Fukushima where I was, and he was going to take the train back home. And he's like, yeah, I can do that. And so then I had to figure out again. It was just, I think the biggest issue for me was the depth perception of like having to look to my right as the far side as opposed to being like, my rear view mirror is like right here on my right instead of it's across the car. And you get used to it quick, but my area had a lot of hills and not mountains, but very, very narrow, windy roads. So I had to get really used to it really quick. And hitting some of those curves with not very confident depth perception is a little scary.
Do y'all have to have a Japanese driver's license in order to even buy a car in Japan, or how does that work?
It depends where you're from.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, really?
So I'm from Canada. I'm a Canadian citizen. So when I came here, I was able to just directly convert my license to a Japanese driver's license
Oh, so you didn't
without
have to do
taking
a test or anything?
No, I didn't have to do any test. Well, I had to do like a written
nice.
test, but I didn't have to
Oh.
do the practical driving test.
It's not even
And
practical.
the practical driving test, if you're American, is apparently like incredibly difficult and is basically like a scam. It's kind of like
it is the Ponzi scheme, man. Like you have to go to the driving school to learn the course and then learn what the checks are, and then because I had to do that. I bought because the one cool thing, and I don't know if it's the same now as it was 10, 15 years ago, but you can get an international driver's license and you can drive in Japan on the international driver's license for a year. But after that year, it expires, and if you're an American, you have to convert. As long as it's within that year, you can convert your international driver's license or U.S. driver's license to the Japanese one. Or maybe it's not even within the year. You could do it regardless, but you have to do that test, the practical test and everything. So I didn't want to have a gap. So I drove on the international license for about 3 months before I had to get it renewed. And like you said, I had heard and I did a lot of research on it. And, there was a driving school that was maybe about a 5-minute drive from my apartment. And I would go there for like 2 hours, like 3 or 4 times. And you'd pay like 4,000 yen or 8,000 yen or whatever for each time to spend time on the course and basically have a person sit with you and say, okay, this is what you need to know for the test. You need to look over your shoulder, look at your rearview mirror. I'm sorry, shoulder, side mirror, rearview mirror, side mirror, other shoulder. And you have to make sure to kind of emphasize that you're looking over dramatize, like looking around just to show. And you have to like get out before you get in the car. You have to check underneath the car, behind the car, in front of the car. All these stupid steps that, I mean, you do it naturally as a driver, but like you have to accentuate all of it for the test.
Yeah.
And then there's like the hook or the S curve or something where everyone, if you clip the curb, it's like an auto fail. But you can back up and you can correct yourself as long as you don't clip the curb. And I managed to do that, but apparently I lost the point because I didn't look clearly enough over my shoulder when I went into reverse. And they're like, oh, if you would have, you might have killed a kid, is what the guy said. But yeah, those tests, man. The written test was like 10 questions in English. Like, what do you do at red light? It was simple.
It's like, oh no, think about this.
But yeah, I was curious because I didn't know if Canada had the same process. But I think the big reason for the U.S. is that licenses are managed and maintained at a state level, so there's not like a nationwide like driver's license. You have like your Louisiana license or your California, and there's different rules and things that regulate it, which is why there's no standard like
Oh,
license to like get that like easy conversion in Japan.
that makes much more sense than the reason that was explained to me before.
Yeah,
The legend I heard at the time was that because because America makes it difficult for Japanese drivers to get a license, as kind of like tit for tat, Japan also makes it
I mean that could
difficult
be
for
part of it too.
US drivers. Yeah, this weird geopolitical
Absolutely
thing.
be.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. But all right, so that's I just kind of want to get that question out there before before moving on to drifting, because we did have a few more questions for you about drifting itself. And that's it for this week's episode. Don't you hate cliffhangers? I know. Thank you so much for tuning into the Krewe of Japan podcast. Come back next week for part 2 when we continue our conversation with Albo and take a deeper dive into everything that goes into drifting. From his own personal experiences and attempts at drifting and street racing to the cost considerations that come with partaking in the sport. You won't want to miss out. In the meantime, head over to Albo's social media. On Twitter, he's Albo, ALBO_media. And on Instagram, he's albo.media. Or head over to his YouTube channel. Check out some of his awesome content. Some of these cars, man, are just unbelievable. Have you ever seen some live action street racing in Japan or wherever you are? What's your favorite or preferred sports car? Share with us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at Krewe of Japan Podcast. That's at KREWEOFJAPANPODCAST at Krewe of Japan Podcast on Instagram. Facebook, just search Krewe of Japan Podcast. Twitter is just at Krewe of Japan, KREWEOFJAPAN. While you're there, give us a like, follow, retweet, share, comment, anything. We love interacting with our listeners. Let us know how you're enjoying the podcast. Or perhaps you prefer to provide your feedback in a more private setting. Send us an email, kreweofjapanpodcast@gmail.com. I won't spell it this time, don't worry. Speaking of feedback, if you're enjoying this episode, or the ones you listened to last week or the week before, please feel free to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast streaming app. We're trying to level up that rating game, y'all. Still working on it. But seriously, any and all support is always incredibly appreciated. That's it for today. Until next time.